Hello and welcome to a new episode of the Kids Media Club podcast. In each episode, we take a look at what's happening in kids media, talking to producers, creators, journalists and analysts working in and around the industry. I'm Andy Williams.
Hello, and I'm Jo Redfern. And once again, we have our friend of the show. In fact, we've almost adopted her, Emily Horgan, who is our resident kind of analyst and talks about all things data and context. So welcome again, Emily. Thank you for joining us. And
Hello.
We have Helen Dugdale with us today, who is a journalist and with whom we wanted to speak today about YouTube after she penned a very interesting article in TBI Vision lately about YouTube. Now, did you know that next year YouTube turns 18? Oh, don't they grow up quickly? So we thought we would have a big old discussion about YouTube. What's changed over the years? Where are we at now with YouTube? How, in terms of public perception, its usage, its perception by broadcasters, how has it changed over those 18 years? So welcome, Helen. I'll let you say hello in a moment, but yes, why don't you just kind of kick off and giving us your upsum of how far YouTube has come in that 18 years?
Yeah, so thanks for having me on the show. Well, when I started writing the article, I actually thought YouTube was about 13 years old. So when I realised it was 18 years old, I was quite shocked and felt I'd aged myself several years. It's just come along so much, hasn't it? It's no longer the younger little sibling that's annoying the traditional broadcasters. It's kind of like, it's got its heritage, it's got roots, it's earned respect. It's kind of up there as one of the big players, isn't it? And it's not going anywhere. It's only just going to get bigger and stronger.
Yeah, I kind of like the way that YouTube is turning 18 and yet the BBC and Disney are both turning 100. Like, I feel like that sums up media landscape right now. Like, YouTube is grown up, getting a job, like, you know, maybe starting to drive, starting to drink. I'm not sure that's going to bode out well for the future. Well, the other two, respectively, say dinosaurs have been in the game for a century.
Do you know, wouldn't it be great? Just in my mind then I had a flash of some artist needs to do some kind of family picture, some representation of all of these media companies as a family. Wouldn't that be brilliant? There you go.
Commission it.
Yeah, there's something for you to draw, Andy. That's a challenge for you. Helen, you used the word kind of, as it's grown up, it's earned respect. Well, isn't that interesting, given that, you know, within our very recent memory, there wasn't much respect for YouTube. How do you think it's gone about earning it?
I think because brands are launching on there, aren't they? Instead of, you know, in the early days, brands and content creators put their content on YouTube, hoping to be found by one of the big broadcasters or one of the big streamers. But now they're just content creators like, you know, Snoop Dogg and Claude Brook, who's brought out Doggyland. I show they brought that straight to YouTube early September, and when I spoke to him for the article, he just said they didn't need to go to a streamer, they didn't need to go to a big broadcaster. They were happy with the access that YouTube would bring to their show, and how all kids of all ages and from across the whole of the world would be able to have access to it. And they're not looking to take Doggyland anywhere else. They're obviously up for for conversations with broadcasters along the way, but they're confident that they just want to use YouTube to have the show sitting on there.
That's the key thing I think we're seeing, like, is, you know, it is being seen as an avenue to launch shows. And also, I don't think you can launch a show on any platform, a show for kids on any platform, and not have a YouTube presence. I mean, the one that I always think of that like is calling out for a strong YouTube presence is Hilda. Hilda is an awesome Emmy Award-winning show on Netflix that lots of people haven't heard of. Yeah. It's based on graphic novels. I think, you know, it feels like it's the volume of its fandom could be blown out by it being a bit more accessible. You know, but the thing is that shows are launching there, and the democratization of the platform and its accessibility to anybody to just upload anything, which obviously has its drawbacks, also has that potential that you don't have to have the big deal with the streamers. You don't have to be like the biggest, you know, show in the world. I think of shows like Masha and the Bear, which is huge globally now, I think, because of its YouTube presence. That's what's helped that show build, not necessarily, you know, any of the background that it came from. So I think YouTube is just such an opportunity, and although its record with kids and taking care and caretaking that audience isn't stellar, far from stellar, honestly, but we all have to admit it's the biggest VOD platform in the world for children. It just is.
Yeah, and there's a whole generation that's just grown up with it. They don't remember the world before YouTube, do they? And they just expect to what they, to expect to find content on there. And if it's not, they're kind of like, well, maybe, not dig any further because it's not on the platform that they head to straight away.
I mean, one of the things I find really interesting with YouTube is the relationship with the creators on that platform and how your mindset has to kind of change in a way that's quite different from traditional TV. I mean, even for something like, I'm interested to see how Doggyland performs, because I think sometimes what people underestimate is just how much content you've got to feed YouTube to actually get momentum and traction. So you've got to have a very different mindset from the traditional TV mindset of, finessing and perfecting each episode, because it's a machine that just needs you to be feeding content, and it needs you to be communicating with that audience kind of, as much as possible, because it's that relationship between the creator and the audience on YouTube, which is a very different relationship to any of the traditional platforms. And do you think the creators are starting to adjust to that?
I think I think they launch with that in mind, that they know that the audience want to get up close and personal with them, and also the creators want that, synergy with the audience. And Claude and Snoop Dogg launched Doggyland with 30 episodes already in the bank to go live, because they knew that as soon as it hit, there'd be the demand for it. So since then, they've been launching every new episode every Tuesday. And if you look at their Instagram as well, that pushes people to YouTube, and the interaction on Instagram with young kids wanting to dress up as one of the characters is just phenomenal. And it was like that within 2 weeks of launch. So, and you wouldn't get that on a traditional platform, a traditional broadcaster, would you?
And it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, we've discussed Bow Whizzle before, which is a rabbit hole I fell down and became a slight obsession for a while. But again, interesting in your article when you were speaking to Claude Brooks was, they made a conscious decision to go straight to YouTube. They didn't want a broadcaster, and that is fascinating for me, because that's a tipping point we've reached, isn't it? We've all come from a background where you were chasing broadcasters. You were scraping together money to try and get to markets, to get FaceTime with broadcasters in this seemingly impenetrable world of trying to get your idea to them. And then YouTube quietly comes along and removes, or at least lowers, a lot of those barriers to entry, but has the potential to bring you a far greater audience. And one of the key things that I think, and certainly that I'm using in my job now, is feedback. Broadcasters have always been terrible at feeding back to their suppliers, viewing figures, data. And actually, there it is on YouTube. Of course, we know Moonbug have mastered that art. You get real-time feedback on what kind of episodic content is working, what characters are tracking. You can then use that in subsequent episodes. So it's interesting to hear increasingly creators saying, no, we're not going to broadcasters first. They might be part of the mix, but they come much later now because we're going on YouTube first.
That was my first question to Claude, because of obviously, the audience that Snoop brings. I just thought they'd be rocking up to a channel in America and going, we've got this, or getting some kind of rights going on, a big argument about who wants it, and they just weren't interested. Maybe further down the line, they're saying that they're not saying that they wouldn't want to do something, but they're just really happy with YouTube.
Obviously, bringing Snoop Dogg to the conversation from the get-go has turbocharged their YouTube presence, and that wouldn't necessarily be typical for a kids brand launching on there without that. Obviously, I think what you've said there, Helen, about the commitment and being like, you need to be all in. It's not just the days of, we'll just put it on YouTube. That's not how it works. There needs to be a content plan. It doesn't necessarily all need to be high-end content. Andy, like you said, there's ways of repackaging and reserving that is completely acceptable to the algorithm, but you do need to commit up front. And the other thing I think you need, it is a different way of producing. And I think a lot of a lot of kids producers that I speak to don't get that. They assume that because they can make television, they can make YouTube videos. And I don't think it's the same thing. You need to appreciate it as the platform that it is. And if you're launching a new show there, you need to play to it. You know, the things that people go to YouTube for, the search, you know, you might want to make a great preschool series that hits really deeply home about, you know, particular, you know, emotional learning, etc. But if you want to launch it on YouTube, you should launch it with nursery rhymes, because that's what people are looking for, and that's how you'll start surfacing, and then bring in the different content. That's something that I see a lot. People think that if they make TV, they can make YouTube videos, and it's not the same thing.
Yeah, and I think that's absolutely right on the intention-led search aspect of YouTube. I think that really does change the kind of content that you're producing if you understand that that's how people are getting to it.
I think you're right, Helen. I'd be interested in your thoughts on that. But you know, from their point of view, from if you know, we're still talking about Snoop and Claude, but you know, again, back to what Emily said, it's that intention. You're looking for something, but on YouTube, you need to deliver it pretty quickly, don't you? Because otherwise, there's a million other things they can navigate away to. And a lot of producers for TV have the luxury of much longer setup for storylines. You know, you've got time. That's one thing you don't necessarily have on YouTube is time, because if someone is looking particularly for something, you've got to surface it probably within, first 10 seconds or so, or else there's this whole smorgasbord of content that they're trying to lure them away.
That's it. And what, you know, touching on what Claude said again, he knew that when he came to YouTube with Doggyland, that they were bringing Snoop. So obviously he was going to bring an audience, but also they were kind of remixing and hip-hop-fying, if that's a word. So they bring in new life to nursery rhymes. So then all of a sudden you're talking to a cross-generation of audiences, aren't you? You've got granddads and aunties and uncles who all know these songs, but then they come running in when they're hearing Bow Whistle and the Dog Crew kind of rapping them. So that obviously they're going to want to watch them with the younger generation. So
I know the funny thing about Snoop Dogg is as well, though, obviously he's got a super high profile, but you probably would have found a lot of kids broadcasters who didn't want to go near him because, you know, his reputation in terms of his respect to women and, you know, and he holds to that, like that's part of his shtick, like, you know, maybe would have been a bit of a turnoff, and yet he's proven that it's not a turnoff to audiences. And we kind of, you know, maybe we talk to ourselves a little bit too much in kids media and kind of self-flagellate, go, no, it couldn't possibly because, you know, this happened then. But actually the audience are prepared to accept it because he's got that playfulness.
I think if we go extend that kind of creator question a little bit further, you know, we talk about Mr. Beast as well. You know, Snoop already has a following, and I think Emily's point is really pertinent in that actually it does help on YouTube if you already have a following and a community that you can direct there. But, you know, aside from the fact that actually broadcasters might not be the primary choice for your content anymore, that YouTube has also become a launchpad for businesses and for brands. I mean, Mr. Beast exemplifies that in the sense that, you know, one of the biggest creators on YouTube, but has been able to launch a business off the back of it. He's launched Feastables chocolate bars. You've got the Sidemen who, you know, play a charity football match and get 2.5 million concurrent streams on YouTube. You know, that's viewing figures some broadcasters would give their eye teeth for. And the Sidemen beginning to launch their own products. You know, so how have you seen YouTube change in terms of its launchpad for not just for kids content, but actually it's a business platform as well now?
Yeah, definitely. You know, and going back to the Sidemen, the whole Prime Drinks, you know, Logan Paul and KSI's Prime Drink. I've got a 14-year-old who spent £8 on one bottle because he wouldn't wait until we could take him to Asda that night. It's phenomenal, isn't it? The reach, and it all starts from one platform.
Yeah. I mean, it's the biggest marketing platform on the planet, and one of the things I think is kind of inspiring about Sidemen and Mr. Beast is that you can have people you can have very rich companies that can't dedicate the time to really make the same impact, but you can have young producers that might not be rich, but they're rich in time that they can dedicate to that, and that makes all the difference. You can really, I mean, careers can explode on that, and brands as well. It's amazing.
Yeah, I think we've seen. I've definitely said this before, probably to you guys, but it was, that iteration of Creator 2.0, 3.0, and you're seeing that, where there was like the whole Brick Crew YouTube kind of group before with the Zoella and Zoe Sugg, and sorry, Zoella and her brother Joe Sugg, and that crew, and that they were there, they learned the lessons, but now the sidemen and stuff are coming up, having seen that narrative and that journey play out, and they're not making the same mistakes. I would argue you can still see that as well on preschool, where you've got, little baby bum that started as a bit of a fluke, or they just made it for themselves, and then Coco Melons come on and kind of reiterated that, and arguably Little Angel, which is the new one acquired by Moonbug, is kind of the next generation of that again. It's becoming a lot more intentional because people have seen how it's worked before. It's kind of gone past just the test phase. It's the apply learnings phase, if you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm. In terms of, I'm quite interested in this. I'm reading a lot at the moment about niching, finding a niche versus mass. And I think that's something that I can certainly see coming out on YouTube. You've said, Helen, you can almost find anything you want there. And we know that that YouTube has become a kid's default search engine. We Google stuff, kids YouTube it. My youngest learned how to tie his school tie from a YouTube video. It's anything that they want to know is there. That does create a lot of opportunity for this kind of niche. So what are your views on this kind of, okay, we've established that YouTube now is garnered respect as a platform that can really create reach, but actually it can also create some quite powerful niche fandoms.
That's it. And in the article, I explored how content creators are thinking that because there's a lot more freedom around the content they can put on there, there's less people, there's less restrictions to entry, there's less people that they've got to answer to. So there's more space to explore stories that kind of look at fluid gender and diversity as well, whereas the broadcasters are still a bit kind of standoffish around that, aren't they? Or, the barriers are breaking down, but they're still a little bit more scared. So YouTube, it's almost like free reign. And the audience that they're talking to, they just expect stories to feature stories that aren't necessarily dominated by male or female gender. There's a lot more freedom around them.
Yeah, and I think you see that like even across the geolocations and stuff like that. It's not just about US content. It can be content from anywhere. I mean, the one thing we're not talking about on YouTube is T-Series, which is the biggest presence on YouTube by a country mile, but derived from India. I mean, you're seeing that kind of, that ability to kind of serve local audiences, or even if they're at scale, like somewhere like India, obviously local is a big place, and that can push through. And it does, Masha and the Bear is another example. It doesn't just have to be, what we kind of all hold in our head as a kind of the Mickey Mouse American content.
I think that's the nice thing, is that it opens the avenues to more content coming through. We spoke on a podcast, one of the previous podcasts, about anime and how kids are looking towards lots more anime content. Korean content is really beginning to track. There's stuff coming out of India. There's an animation that I think ended up on Netflix called The Fukre Boys, which I first found on YouTube, which is brilliant. So again, it kind of it reduces a lot of those geo barriers, doesn't it, Emily? In terms of kids,
and it validates it, right? Like it validates that it doesn't have to be that a kid that looks like this or a kid that looks like that, or a person, like it validates it. And you see that with streamers now. It's like, oh, Squid Game is a big thing. Yeah, Korean people are great at telling stories. Like why is that such a surprise, right?
Yeah, and it's so fast to get stuff there. I mean, you think about the development process for a traditional broadcaster, and even if they had all of the enthusiasm to do something with it, it's still going to take them a year or two before it actually lands on a screen. Whereas with YouTube, it's just kind of almost instantaneous, that if you can record it or if you can animate it, and the animation's getting a lot quicker now than it used to be, and upload it, then somebody can find it. And it's that speed of creation which I think has kind of totally revolutionized the way people consume content. It's amazing.
I have a question for you, Andy, because you're the creative here. I mean, I know in theory that's lovely, but how would you feel about that lens on your own? Like, publishing stuff on YouTube, having to work, 10-week turnaround, the pressure of the audience feedback. Like, is that something you'd welcome, or like how would it make you feel? Would it make you sweat?
Yeah, I mean, it depends how much. I guess it depends how much you're kind of dictated by the algorithms to kind of run that hamster wheel. Yeah, I'm not sure really. It is nice sometimes having that barrier and having that space to refine something, and it doesn't really allow itself to have that. If you've got to get something up there immediately, that's why people like Mr. Beast or Sidemen, kind of that stuff really works, is that stuff can be put out there quite rapidly. If you've got to sit in a writer's room and work through a couple of drafts of the script, you're just not going to be able to get it uploaded at the same speed.
I want to pick up a little bit on something you said there, Andy, but then I'm going to throw it back to both Emily and Helen, because I think you'll both have a viewpoint on it. And it's about that kind of relationship with the audience. And what's come through here is that, we've got creators like Mr. Beast, like the Sidemen. What they do much better than broadcasters is they get to know their audience. They have a really intimate relationship with the audience. And as you said just momentarily, a moment ago, Andy, they give them time. Now, that's very often not something broadcasters can do. They can't get to know their audience intimately because of the timeframes and how traditional TV is made. And similarly, they don't very often give them time. So to both of you, I'll come to you, Emily, first, and then to Helen. So what can traditional broadcasters learn from YouTube and, by extension, from creators like Mr. Beast and the Sidemen? What can they learn?
Yeah, well, I mean, you've kind of hit the nail on the head there, Joe. And it is hard with kids because you're not supposed to be talking to them without their parents there. And when you're in a big grown-up broadcaster that's full of paperwork, etc., like that's a key barrier. But like, I think creators like Mr. Beast coming up, they represent such an opportunity, and it doesn't even necessarily need to be creative folks at that level. Obviously, he's super successful. It's people who have grown up with social and YouTube as front and center in their lives. I think I think that's where the opportunity to listen can be. To understand what their views are on how content should be made, how it should be structured. And not to kind of stay in the dark ages of like, we do linear broadcasting, therefore we do this. I think that would be a risk factor, honestly, in terms of evolving, what we're doing with content and how we're speaking to the audience. I think that's the real opportunity that creators like Mr. Beast and young people coming up through media really represent, because we don't get it. Like we just don't like, and I love jumping into new social platforms. Like, I'm on TikTok, but like, I'm still on Mom Talk, right? Like, I'm not at the cutting edge of TikTok, much and all as I, would love to be. I just am at that cool, So, it's trying to kind of tap into that sensibility. And again, back to that point of just because you can make TV and maybe you've made award-winning TV that's been very successful doesn't, you need to still have that humility to understand that you can learn, and I think that's something that maybe is, needed in a little bit higher quantities at times.
Mm. It was interesting from my point of view. When I was writing the article, I actually reached out to Mr. Beast and the Sidemen to try and get them involved, but I didn't get any. Well, the Sidemen actually said they'd come back and looked at the questions, but then they didn't want to be involved. So, and also speaking to the other people that I spoke who were involved in the interview, they didn't directly want to give feedback on exactly what traditional broadcasters should be doing, which was, I thought they would be, happy to have the floor open to them and they'd have loads of content and loads of feedback. But they kind of danced around the answers. They kind of said that they need to relax the grip on rules and regulations to make it easier for people to work with them. And also to trial more shorter episodes and shorter versions of the content, because obviously that works really well on YouTube, doesn't it? but they
That's
obviously
interesting.
there's a lot of respect still there from
Mhm.
you know YouTube content creators, and I think they see that traditional TV is relevant, still well respected. It creates a great experience and they provide quality content. But yeah, I think they just think that they can both kind of last, and there's enough space for both of them to be around for a long time.
Creators like Mr. Beast and the Sidemen and others are mindful that actually there might still be a place for broadcasters in their brand plans. It's still an important platform. So, much as YouTube, I've no doubt, could sustain them if they chose only to stay on that platform, they are beginning to look at other platforms. Mr. Beast gone on TikTok. So, broadcasters still do have their place.
I think the key thing I'll be watching for, and I'll be waiting a while for it, but I'm good for it. With this kind of 3.0 generation of creators, is how they evolve it as they get older, right? Because this is the thing I've heard about, those 2.0 or 1.0 creators on YouTube, is that, once you're 25 or 30, like the people the audience who you're speaking to are then 25 or 30, like they're around your age, and they've grown up, and they've probably grown out of YouTube, and they've grown out of, I don't say grow out of social media, but their use of it changes. And then you kind of have to make the decision: are you going to continue to try to talk to the people who are really hot on there, in terms of maybe 13, or old kids are there, but when you're talking about these creators, you're kind of like teenager to early 20s. Are you going to continue talking to them? Are you relevant to still continue talking to them? Because if you're 30, like is your view probably isn't the same, doesn't have the same authenticity or relevance as it would have when you were younger. So it's trying to, I think there does come a natural point, so far anyway, where creators have to evolve away from YouTube, because the audience that's there isn't the audience that it used to be for them.
Yeah, it's a good point.
I think that's true.
Yeah, I think it's a good point. Maybe they're hedging their bets for their future.
Yeah, it's like
career.
the 5 or 10 year plan.
Yeah, absolutely. As you were saying that, I was thinking about Adele with her albums. She's grown up making music. She had 19, she had 21. You see the sidemen. One of the sidemen literally left the charity football match and went to see his newborn. So it's very likely that they will become parents themselves. I imagine that will influence the kind of content that they make. Who knows? Maybe they're going to be making sidemen nursery rhymes in the next few years. But it will be interesting to see, and it's a nice point at which to kind of wrap up the conversation. As YouTube grows up and turns 18 next year, we're talking about creators and brands on the platform also growing up, and actually potentially they might go through their whole life cycle on YouTube, and we'll be able to track that and follow that. Let's give the final word to you, Helen. So in writing that article, clearly you did a lot of thinking and speaking to people around it. What was the takeout for you? What do you get? If you had a crystal ball, what would you say is next for YouTube in its next 18 years?
I think a lot more of the same, just a lot more freedom in content, niche market, but also working with brands and broadcasters away from YouTube as well, like a gateway to work with more traditional broadcasters. I think there's a lot of respect for people on YouTube for other brands and media companies, and they want to kind of coexist together.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much.
Fantastic.
Thanks,
That's awesome. Thank you, Helen.
Thank you to Emily, and thank you to Helen. Lovely to see you.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks for having me.
That's all for this episode of Kids Media Club podcast. If you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe so you don't miss an episode. Thanks for listening, and we hope we'll be back for the next one.